So do you want you to, okay. So here today we have the Django ARM review. First, it stands for Object Relational Mapping. So if you recall, you first want to create your virtual environment, and then you want to activate it. And then afterwards, you can install Django on your virtual environment. And then to create a new project, we typically do this. And I saw that you can have Django or Django admin. And I guess it doesn't really matter, but probably Django admin might be a little better. Usually when I do that, I usually have like this this folder here. And then here you can see I have my virtual environment here. I usually call it .venv. And then here I have this, I might have cloned it from somewhere, but
I could only see the presentation.
oh, okay, wait. I'll just share my entire screen. Okay, so here I have my, usually I have a folder here, and then here I have a virtual environment I call it .venv. You guys can see it, right? Okay.
Yeah, now we can. Yeah.
And then here is probably the project name, project created by that. Okay. So then afterwards, since this is a Django ARM, you're probably going to want a database. So there are two ways to create a database, but they're both doing the same thing. If you set it up correctly in Bash, you can do create database or create DB and then the database name. Or you can like log into Postgres and then log into pSQL and then do your create database name. And I think you might need a semicolon. I'm not entirely sure, but I think if you have one there, it doesn't hurt. Okay, so then going back, you still have to install your pip install psychopg2. If you forget to do this, it will tell you when you do your make migrations, I think, and you go, okay, I just install this. Hopefully it's pretty quick. And this allows Django to talk with the PostgreSQL. So then once you have your, I think project, we call it, yeah, your project, you can go into your settings.py, and here you want to change this to PostgreSQL. I think usually it's something else, but I forget what it was. And then also you want to put in your name of your database. All right. And then once you do that, you could start your app. So you want to make sure that you're in the folder that contains manage.py. So in your terminal or whatever, you want to cd into that. And you could probably do it like an ls to double check. We eventually want to do this where you start app and then app name. And I think this creates like the app folder, right? I think in this example, here you have your project, and then I think the project was bookshelf, and then I think this was created from the app. Yeah, app name. Yeah. So like the bookshelf is the project. It has the same name as the project folder. So that's why it has the settings.py. And then start app name. The app name is book app. It creates this folder with like, I think it has like this guy and some tests and whatever, yeah. And this app. Okay, so then afterwards, now that your app is created, you want to add it to settings.py. So like in settings.py, there's this like list called installed apps. You want to add app name to the bottom. So usually it's like right here, and then you just scroll up a little. And it's like right here. So in general, so now that you have all that sort of set up, we can actually get to coding stuff. And I think a majority of the Django ORM classes, well, all of them would appear in models.py. Usually you have to import models from this guy. And then here you can see, I guess, class attributes with the some of the associations and stuff. Yeah, Jacob, do you have a question?
Yeah, before we get too far away from it, I've had trouble creating my databases in the past. And I usually just do the first way that you showed, like through the shell or terminal or whatever. Do we need to be like, if I was just in my like root directory and did create DB and then database, whatever I want to call it, like how does my Django project know to like go to that specific database, or would I need to like create that already in like the folder where my project is?
So I'm pretty sure when you do this create DB database name, you can do that from anywhere, because
Okay.
it's creating it in the Postgres, like what is it called, Relational Database Management System, RDBMS or whatever.
Oh,
So like so that's sort of separate from your project technically, but as long as you have this in your settings.py, it should be able to connect to it.
okay. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I've had issues with my creating databases, and I didn't know if it was like because I wasn't putting it in like the projects folder, or it's probably something else, but that clears it up. Thank you.
Yeah. Francisco, do you have a question?
Yeah, are you guys going to be going over how exactly you build your database and like the relations and how they connect to each other later on? Or is this what we're getting as far as like a database breakdown?
As
So I
in-
would say that this is kind of the overall thing we'll be covering, but I can leave a resource in the chat if you're talking about like the many-to-many relationships or the one-to-many. Is that what you're talking about, Francisco?
Yes.
Okay,
think-
so this is the example, and this will become more clear later because I have a demo that talks about a little bit of this, but what Logan has here is essentially as much as we're covering. So I can leave like the resource for the different relationships if you want to look at that, but this is what primarily we'll be looking at today.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, if I can get that resource, that would be great, Avery.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So recall that the classes will be in models.py, and some validations might be here, or some associations might be here, like I believe a foreign key, right? Okay, so then, so if you're using JavaScript, which might be using Axios, in settings.py, don't forget to add underneath the static URL equals this. You typically want this. And since this uses OS, you also have to import OS. Yeah, okay. So after you have all of that, you finally want to turn the classes and models.py into tables, and double check you should still be in the folder that contains manage.py. So then you run your make migrations, and then with your app name, and then hopefully it will say something like, I think it creates a migrations folder, and then hopefully like it doesn't throw an error or anything. And then you do your migrate, and then you can do run server. And later on, I'll talk a little bit more about the errors, which is like in part 2. So that's just an overview, I guess. Does anyone have any questions? Jacob?
Would you mind talking a little bit about why, like, whenever we update a model, we'll need to like make migrations again and then migrate?
So I think when you're you're typing stuff in your like models.py, right? And like you're adding or you're removing things, or like you're updating stuff like here. So then I think you had to do the make migrations in order to update your tables in your database, right? So I think whenever you do something like that, you want to tell, I guess, PostgreSQL that, hey, I updated my models, so you have to update the tables. And I guess these two commands together basically allow that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? So yeah, obviously you can go back through the Romeo Platoon notes and stuff, and you can find all of these. I mean, technically they're sort of mostly in, I think, week 6, day 5, and week 7, day 4 or something. But I'll probably put this, I could probably share this later on in the resources channel, just because, you know, it's all in one place. Yeah. Okay, Avery, should I go over the migration errors, or do you want to take over?
Why don't I introduce the project, and then you can cover that too when we get to the migrations, because that's kind of where I'm at with the demo. Okay.
Okay.
So what I've prepared today is just a short demo of a Django project that I feel like will overall encompass everything you'll need to know for the test. So if you feel like you can really understand and grasp this demo and understand each piece and how it's working, I feel like you'll be pretty much prepared. So the way we're going to do this is, in order to save some time and not have me like type out every single thing and then fix any errors that way, I'm going to actually share the entire project with you from my GitHub in the chat. So what we'll be doing is, this will allow you to like look at all of the files, but when I'm going to do the program, I'm going to start from the moment where you've kind of set up everything in terms of like the static files and all of that. And then we'll slowly build like the general process of, okay, this is what I do next. This is what I do next. And if you want to refer to the other files, you can look at the overall project that's already done on my GitHub. So if you want to have that open on the side, that's fine. But I'm going to share my screen, and I'll start with the kind of the point that Logan left off with all of the setup in terms of static files, templates, all that. Okay, so let me share my screen for a second. Let's see. Okay, can everybody like see my screen? So I wrote it in the README of the project if you click on it, but it's very much similar to the Cars and Brands project. And so if you feel like you have a super good grasp on that, if you then that's great. So this is where we're starting off. Now, there are a few points that I want to talk about when you first put together your project and you are trying to like build upon that. The first few things are, you want to make sure that you understand what you're importing where, and that you've already set up everything so that you're not going back and checking, did I remember to put my static folder here? Did I remember to put my settings.py, all of that stuff? So what you want to think about is maybe write a checklist out. Did I add my JavaScript? Did I do my static stuff? Did I put my folders in the right place? So let's go through some of those things first. Sorry, I should probably talk about the overview of this project, but basically you're given genres, and those genres organize books titles, and those books then have their own information. So going through the README, we have each book has a certain amount of, they have the title, the author, the description. The genre just has the title name. And just like cars and brands, we want to click on, a list of genres, and that'll lead us to a list of the books that belong to those genres. And then with each click of those books, we want to be able to display the information. And then finally, we want to be able to add books and edit books within our database. So that's kind of the overall scope of this project. Now, what I have here is I've already set up the entire project in terms of like the skeleton. So here's bookshelf, which is going to be the name of our project. This is the book app where Logan was talking about, where you've already added the app to the settings.py and everything like that. This is an important one that sometimes I see people miss. When you do your static folders and when you're starting with your empty, JavaScript file, make sure that this static folder is on the outside of this book app and this app and the project. Do you see those folders? You make sure that you have it outside of that. If you put this static folder inside of your book app or your bookshelf, that will cause errors because your Django project won't know where to find those files. So that's one big thing that I hope people kind of remember from this is, okay, where are my folders? Now, separate to that, we have templates and fixtures that I also want to talk about. These are two folders that are going to reside within your app, okay? Don't put them in your overall project or the project that holds the settings.py. It's not the same as your static folder. We want these two folders to be within your app, okay? So once you know that, okay, I've put these folders in the right place, that'll create a good structure for you to build upon, okay? So that's really important. Now going off of that, let's make sure that we are first putting some data into our database, because our first step here, when I want to build this project is, okay, I want to be able to display all the genres that are in my database currently. And then I also want to eventually have books and everything like that. So what I've done here, and what I think will probably be on your test, is you want to know how fixtures work. And so here I've already populated this because I didn't want to spend time, trying to figure out what books I wanted to put in here. But here's the first kind of model that I'll have. And I still have to create the model and migrate that. So we'll do that step next. But first I want to populate my figure out the data that I want. Okay, so we don't need to overthink fixtures, but this is just a brief refresher. We have this sort of list thing, right? And then we have each kind of row that we want to put within our database here, separated by a comma. So when you want to add more, remember to put that comma there or it will get confused too. But you have your model with your app name. So in this case, book app. And then we have the model name. So this will be done within models.py. Okay, so just to reiterate, let's write out the models here. And again, I'm not going to be typing everything out. I'm mostly going to be copy and pasting the code that I've already done for this demo. So if you have any questions, just let me know. But if you want to know where I'm getting all of this code from, it's from the GitHub that I've just shared with you. Okay, so with this first model, we want our genre, right? So our genre just has our name. And this will be, here, let me pull this up. How can I do this? Oh, okay. Can you still see my screen with the models?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So first genre, we have this, which is just the genre, models.model. And then we have our name, our char field. Remember to put max length. That's another one that'll cause issues if you don't put a max length there. And I've put blank to false because I want every genre to have a name. Otherwise, it's pretty much useless in my database. Okay. Now, let's put our next one, book. Okay, now book is going to have a title, author, and description. So let's put this underneath genre. Now, there are a few things that I want to point out here, which I think we can bounce back to Logan on this one. But let's say, okay, so first of all, does anybody have any questions of what they see here? Models.char field, max length, blank equals false, all this stuff. Does generally look familiar? All good? Okay, great. So let's
Wait,
say,
Avery, I'm so sorry. Is
Yeah, go
blank
ahead.
equals false like the same thing as like saying it can't be null?
yeah, kind of. There is a difference because actually, if I put null, true or false here, it actually doesn't affect it. I think Adam or Raphael went over it once, but basically, if you want it to literally mean like I can't have anything in here, like you don't want it to be empty essentially. But that's why I put blank there and not null, because null is different.
Okay, but blank is like a keyword. You didn't define that or
Yeah,
anything?
yeah, blank is a keyword.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Hey, Avery, you have for in class book in the genre attribute, you have the default value set to 1 for genre.
Yes.
Why?
Yeah. So this is
That
actually
looks
part
odd.
of going to be a demonstration of
Oh.
what if migrations don't work. But this is a good point. So let's say the first time I run this migration, I forgot. Okay, I just forgot that I needed to reference books with a genre, and I just have a bunch of books and genres, and they're not connected at all. So hold on, give me a second. Okay, so let's say I did this. So Python. Okay, sorry, my computer's kind of slow. So I've made migrations.
Avery,
Yeah.
a quick
what's
question.
that?
Are you gonna go over how to import the fixtures and all that stuff at some point?
Yes, yes. We need to set up the database first in order to import them, but that's coming up right after we kind of make migrations and stuff.
Okay, thank you.
So great. Okay, so it's all been migrated, but right now I don't have the genre associated with this models, right? And so then I look back and I think, oh no, I forgot. Let me do this again. And let's say I didn't have this default here actually. So, because this is how I would think about fixing it, right? Because I would say, okay, I'm gonna put this foreign key. I have genre, which is relating to which one I'm having this like many to one relationship, right? And then this on delete models as cascade. That's how I would think about it first. Now, if I run this, so let's run the make migrations again. Okay, do you see what it says? It says, please fix, select a fix, provide a one-off default now, and quit and manually define a default in models.py. This is a pretty common error I see. It's not really an error, but it's just saying that like, we're changing something kind of important here, and you don't have any sort of value here. So if I had data in this table, what would I do if you didn't put anything there? And so the way to fix this, and this could be really strange because you'd think, well, I have no data in my table. Why are you complaining? This is just kind of a safety feature, I guess, for P-SQL to take care of. So in this case, I want to quit manually and define a default value just to like let it be happy, okay? So I let it quit, it stops, and then if I add a default, now this is an important part, but the reason why I'm saying 1 here is because my genre is going to get an ID, right? Like every one of these models has an ID. So I'm going to have one that says 1. So I'm just going to put the default value as 1 for now, and that'll take care of it. So let's see. Let's make migrations. Oh, did I save? Okay, I think that's fine. Let's see if that works. Okay, migrations have been made, and then I can migrate that. Okay, so that gets around that whole issue. You don't have to, delete your database or anything. Just make sure that you set a default value in that case, and you should be all right. Okay. So Logan, it's up to you. Do you want to talk about your segment before I start loading the data, or like any other make migration issues?
Let me check.
Okay.
Hey, while he's checking, Avery, that default equals 1. That's just
Yeah.
going to make the first one 1, and then others will get different numbers. Is that right? Or is
Yeah,
everything going to be 1?
So it's basically just saying like, so imagine if I had data already that didn't have this genre cell, those wouldn't have any values for genre, right? So this is just saying that like, after I've made these migrations, what should I put in for those empty cells? And that I'm just saying, I want it to be 1, which is referring to genre ID 1.
Okay, so all the empty ones will now have that as 1.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just want to say this is great so far, Avery and Logan.
Yay. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say something. Like sometimes in the past, I would put like default equals like a blank or like nothing or like null, and it would still yell at me, and I would get like so confused. Like, how do I get over this?
Okay.
I actually think blank equals false is probably either the most elegant or like the best practice. I don't know, but it sounds like a good idea. Yeah.
Okay. Well, hopefully this will work out, but this should solve the majority of these kinds of error problems. Logan, did you want to talk about any other ones, or do you think this is good?
Not for now. Did
Okay.
did anyone else have like any people were saying in the chat they got something errors for installing their requirements? Is everyone, are those people fine for now, or anyone?
Oh yeah, so can you hear me? Apparently backports.zoneinfo, if you have Python greater than 3.9, you have to install a different requirement. So I think it was just like a matter of Python version, different Python version.
But it's working for you now?
I'm working on it.
Okay.
It should be soon.
Okay. Just reach out to, like, if it doesn't work still, just reach out to any of the instructors or TAs and we can probably handle it. Okay.
Thanks.
Well, one last thing that I wanted to bring up. This is kind of just like a weird fun fact that I came across. But when you name your app for your project, okay, so like right now I have this as book app. Try to make them all lowercase and use underscore, because for some reason there are certain names that I have come across where like if the app name has like a capitalization, it gets really weird and SQL doesn't work with it. Adam, I don't know if you can speak to why that is, but but then when I rename the app to be lowercase, then it like SQL is fine with that.
Say that again, Avery.
So there are times where like you name your app and if it has a capital in it, and then you try to make migrations, blah, 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 and then you access that table in SQL, it gets angry because it gets confused the uppercase with the lowercase, because it automatically makes the tables lowercase in name and it just doesn't register it. But then if I change the name of the app to lowercase, then it works.
I don't know why. That is interesting. Yeah, the short
Anyway.
answer is I don't know.
Okay.
But I think lowercase is the way to go for sure.
Yeah, so general rule of thumb, if you don't want to like go back and try renaming everything in your settings and blah, 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 from the get-go, when you create your app name, just be careful, make sure it's lowercase to try to avoid any sort of issues that way. And use underscore if you want to separate them into separate words. That's a good way to go about it. Okay, so any questions about that? Otherwise, we're going to start populating our database.
Oh yeah, just real quick, that error that I was having, yeah, if you just go into requirements.txt, in case anybody else was having that same issue, you just put this in there, that stuff that I put in the chat, in requirements.txt, and then it fixed it for me at least.
Nice. Okay. Thank you for the fix. That's awesome. Okay. Now let's work on adding stuff to our database now. Actually, let's make sure our database is working. So I actually named this bookshelf, I believe. Okay, so our database is there. And right now we have our little, let's see. So you see how I have book app, book app, genre. Those are the two tables that we're primarily working on today. So I just wanted to make sure they were there. Okay, cool. So from here, we have fixtures. Now, I don't know how many of you have like been practicing fixtures or know like a lot about this, but again, remember that your fixtures need to be in your book app or your app, wherever, whatever that may be. So your fixtures folder is there. Then we have our name.json. This can be whatever you want. Okay, now we'll look at genres first. So the way I've done it here is you have model, right? This is all one object like together first. So we have model, you do the app name dot the model name. This is lowercase. This is the primary key that you set yourself. So I just set it as 1, 2, 3. And then for the fields, remember, have these curly braces. And this is the name of the genre. And I've just called it mystery because I love mystery novels. And then this is just repeated. Now remember this comma again. Don't forget that because that separates them out. This is the same format. You got your app, your name of the model, a different primary key, fields, different name. This one's really simple, right? We only have one field, and that's just name. Okay, so that's our genres.json. Okay, second one, we got books.json. This is a little more complex, but the idea is very much the same. We have this one object first in the list. It has the app name, the name of the model. Then we have its own primary key, your title, then the author field, the description, and then I have the genre here, which is populated by a key that exists in my genre. So right now I have a primary key of 1. So this book, Sherlock Holmes, belongs to the mystery genre, and so on and so forth. So you repeat that many times. Alicia, you have a question?
Yeah, so since this is a one-to-many relationship, if we were to have to use this JSON fixtures and everything in our project, how would you render the data if there was more than one genre? Is that an array?
So render more than one.
I mean, like
What do you mean?
said, like let's say if it was mystery and action, would you do 1, 2, or is it, how would you add multiple genres on there?
I think you can do it that way, where you can have an array and save it as such. Let's see, if you want multiple genres. Well, I don't think that's a one-to-many relationship anymore, right? Because that could be a many-to-many relationship.
Well, I thought you set it up as one-to-many, that one book can have multiple.
Oh,
genres.
no, I meant one genre can have multiple books. That's the one-to-many relationship I have right now.
Oh, okay.
But what you're describing sounds like a many-to-many relationship, and that would be different. You'd probably have to have like a third model here, and you can read the link I left in the chat to set up a many-to-many relationship. But in this case, I should probably clarify that all I want, the relationship that I want here, is that one genre can have many books, and the books can't have multiple genres, which is not realistic, but that's what we're going with because it's similar to cars and brands in the same sense. Okay, does that kind of clear that up?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so we have books.json, and let's say we've already set up all this data, okay? And each of these have their own. So like this last one goes into, I think I put fantasy or something. This book is genre 3. It has its own primary key. All this is the same. Okay, so in our terminal, we put, let's see if I remember this, Python 3 manage.py load data, and then specifically you want to put in the entire name of your JSON file. So I want to show you this error actually, because this is pretty important. So let's say I wanted to put in the JSON books first, okay? I load the data. Okay, it gives me this entire error message, and it looks scary because it's a lot, right? But this is basically all I need to know here. This key is not present in the table of genre, right? And the reason for this is, we want a genre key, and I haven't put any genres in there yet, so it doesn't know what I'm referring to. So that's the first thing that I need to take care of. So actually, when I put the data in, I need to think about, okay, what is the data relying on? What am I referencing? Because if it doesn't exist yet, then I need that to be in the database first. So the solution to this is just to put genres in first. And genres doesn't rely on reference to anything. So right now it should just load everything. Okay, so we've installed 3 objects. Those are the fixtures. And then we can run our books.json one. And Django should take care of that for me now. Okay, so let's just double check our database. Select, let's say book, and then when you want to check this, make sure that you type out the app name first and then underscore. I think I called it books. Let's try that. Actually, book. Okay, this looks really ugly, but you can kind of see that all my books are now in the database. So I got my Sherlock Holmes, Nancy Drew. I need to fix this because this is Agatha Christie. But there we go. We have our list of books. We have the genre IDs in there, so we can be happy with that. And then just to double check our genres, book app genre. Okay, we have IDs, history, classics, fantasy. Perfect. Okay. Jacob, any questions?
I didn't really understand why you were getting the error the first time you were trying to load the data.
Okay, so let me go back to the models. You see how book has this genres models.foreign key, and it specifically talks about genre in reference to that, right? But if I'm referencing a genre that doesn't exist, Django doesn't know what to do with that information. It says, whoa, 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 you're setting this to a different category or a different genre that I don't know exists yet, okay? So then it stops and says, wait, I can't load this. So when I put in all my genres, I have genre 1, 2, and 3. And then when I put in my books and I'm referencing genres 1, 2, and 3 in the database, it knows, oh, okay, you're talking about mystery. You're talking about classics. You're talking about fantasy. And so then it doesn't get confused. Does that make sense?
So
that's why the order matters there.
What did we change, like in order?
Oh, so all I did was I loaded the order differently. So in the first round, I loaded books first, and then it gave me that error saying like, wait a second, I don't know what this is. So when I did it the second time, I did genres first, and then I did books, and then it was fine.
And then is default equals 1 on line 10? Is that just saying like all of these books will have the default genre of 1?
So that default was to get around the other error we had earlier. I don't if you remember, it was about like if I added this genre,
yeah,
and I already had things populating my table, it would tell me like, what do you want here? We have no information for this data that's already been passed through. And then what you can do is you can exit and say, okay, I'll make the default 1 for all those guys.
Okay.
But we don't actually care about this now, because when we did the books here, we actually already gave each genre their own, or we already put a genre for each book.
Okay.
So Django already knows that in that cell, I'm going to put a genre number, and that's whatever I wrote here.
Okay, and if it didn't have like a number already, it would just default to 1.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But for our purposes, we do want to populate it with numbers that we know, so that when we're testing our own code, we know, okay, I expected Sherlock Holmes to be in mystery and not in something else.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions about loading data in fixtures? Anything, even like the syntax stuff? No? Okay, we're moving on. Okay, so now we get into like the meat of it all, We have like all the code, we're ready with our data. So now we can test everything. Now, first things first, we got to look at the README, which I don't know if you all can see the README that I put on my project, but basically it's giving us a bunch of these URLs, right, that it expects from us. And for each URL, we want to display different things. That's the overall concept of it. And then each of these URLs will link to another URL and so on and so forth, so that we're not typing in the URL into the panel. So one thing that I'd like to point out, which is something that I think could be helpful, is that when you look at all these URLs, can everybody see what I'm talking about right now, or am I just like rambling? It's on the GitHub. Okay.
It's not on your screen, but it's on GitHub. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So if you can look at all the URLs, you'll notice that all of them start with genres, right? And so one way we could think about this is, well, if my entire project is going to have the first part of the URL start with genre, well, I can just put that in my settings.py as such, right? So my original settings.py, which is not the app one, right? Let's see, where am I? This is my book app. Okay. So if I go to my settings.py, oops. No, my URLs.py. I don't know why I'm just, okay. We can start with putting genres in as the first item or first path, because all of them are going to have that. So we can just put that in here now. So remember to include, and then you want to include the urls.py of your app. If you forget the syntax of it, don't worry, it's automatically defaulted right here. It just tells you. So just do the same thing it says there. Okay, so what am I debug? App.urls. Okay, and then if something like this comes up and you don't remember what to do, you can just hover quick fix and it imports it for you, which is really nice. Okay, now this is basically saying, everything that happens in my app is going to start with genres / right? So now we don't have to worry about that in our URLs. But we now do need to add to this URLs PY, which I've created. Remember to write this file. That will be really similar to the settings.py, except now that we have, what am I saying? The projects.py, urls.py from the project. So I'm just going to copy this syntax over because it's basically the same thing. Okay, cool. So now I don't need this include because I'm not branching to anything else. Okay. So the way I like to think about this when I'm trying to create these URLs is sometimes just follow each path at a time and make sure that one segment of your code is working first. So let's work on the first one, which shows a list of genres, and each of those are links to click to their respective books, or the genres and list their books. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type path, right? We can leave this empty because we already have genres written, right? Views dot whatever we're going to name it. Let's call it list books for now. And then I'm going to name it, and I always like naming my URLs because it just makes it simpler to refer to an entire URL passage rather by name rather than the entire address itself. So let's just call it list books. I think that's what I called it. And let me double check. Oh, sorry, not list genres. List genres. Yeah, I forgot that's what we were doing. Okay, list genres. Okay, and then remember up here to import your views. Cool. Okay, so we'll review this once again. This is the URL that's attached to the genres. So really, this entire URL is going to be genres / and that's it. Then this views is referring to a definition or a method that we are going to define ourselves in the views.py. And its name will be list genres. And then the name of this overall command or this overall URL is going to be list genres. Okay. So now let's go back to our views.py and let's define what list genres is going to be. right?
Actually, Avery, I would like to interject here for a sec.
Yeah.
So I think it is better convention to have in your project URLs to have that be your base. So is it this one? Yeah. Oh, actually, it's the other one. So the URLs in Bookshelf.
Oh, okay. Is it this one?
Yeah, yeah. For this one to be just the empty string.
Oh, okay.
And then you can put your genres in the app specific one. This is mainly the project one is mainly for if you have multiple apps, which we didn't really touch on in Django, but it's in Django convention, they want you to make apps that do each a specific thing. So if you have like, if you have a website and it has a blog part and a poll part, they want you to create a different app for each of them. So in the project's URL, that's where you would put like the specific different ones. Yeah, I just wanted to make that note. Also, one last thing in the project, I know I gave some notes in the project for as feedback for the assessment. But generally, if you go to just localhost 8080 or 8000, whatever, if you go to that main page, you should see something. You should always have like a base homepage that you're able to see without having to put / something else, because if a user is going to use your website, they're just usually going to go to yourwebsite.com or whatever the URL is, and they won't know that they have to put a / something to actually access your site, and they don't. It's kind of ugly user interface if you just see that error. So you might want to add something in your first page.
Okay. Okay. So let's do that then. So let's have an empty string that we'll just do, we'll call it index. Say name. Okay, so this will satisfy the whole. Well, okay, we'll have to code it, the views part.
Yeah, I would say even if your index just has a link to the genres page, if your genres is your main landing page, you can do that, or you can have your genres as your first page. So yeah, it's up to you with that one.
Okay, so let's say.
Wait, Zainab, are you saying that you could have like just a blank URL that goes to views.list genres and then also have a path genres that goes to views.list genres?
So yeah, you can do that, or even your index view, it could automatically reroute you in the backend to genres. So it can do, I think it's like HTTP reroute or something. I forgot what it was. Yeah.
Okay.
So that way your user, when they go to your website, all they have to do is put your base URL. So in our case, when we're running this, our base URL is going to be localhost 8000.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so why don't we set that up first, because I didn't have that before. But so I've created an HTML here that I want views.py to display when I have nothing. So if I have an empty string as a URL, I'm going to call base, and I want it to render this base HTML. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to say ahref equals I'm going to call it base. Okay. It's good to me. And then go to genre. Okay, so let me take care of the render in views.py really quick. So I called it def base passing it class. Where did I put this in? Let's see. Should be let's stop book. No. Oops. Cool. I think that should be good. Okay. So just to reiterate what I just did, we went to urls.py. We made this empty. Oh, by the way, I should probably say, okay, so starting over from Zainab's point, we want our urls.py in the original project to be empty so that we can have like an empty string eventually for the URL. Then we continue that empty string here where we call views.base. We've named this base. We're going to views.py, which renders this method, return render request. It renders my HTML. This HTML is in my templates folder, which is called base HTML. I've just repurposed this boilerplate. And all it has on this page is just a link to my base, my URL named base that takes me to the genres, which should be, oh wait, shoot, no, sorry. This should be taking me to list. Yes. Okay. Okay, so what it's actually doing is it's going to take me to this URL. So then we have an empty URL that can take us to a URL that actually has information. So let's run that in case I have an error somewhere. Oops, okay. Genres, no attribute. Oh, it's because I haven't defined anything yet. Okay. So we'll get to this code next, but let me just copy and paste this to satisfy that first. Okay. It's giving me an error. Let me fix this for a second.
Try putting a comma after the end of line 21.
I think it's because I'm running another thing on my server right now. So let me just reload this. Wait, you said comma after line 21?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, let me rerun this. Let me see. Logan, how did you share your entire screen? Did you have to reshare it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Or there's a little option
Okay,
above.
so this is what I see on my Chrome. Okay,
We
so that
can't.
gives us some,
Okay, there we go.
can you see the window now?
We can now, yeah.
Okay, so this is the base HTML. And if I click this, hopefully, okay, templates does not exist because I haven't created my HTML for list genres yet. But now we know that this first HTML works. Okay, so now we can move on to the genres, like listing genres. So let's talk about that. Let's see, can I? Okay, So we are back at the app URLs. The app URLs has this genres that views.list genres with the name list genres as the overall name that you can call for the URL. Now, if I go to views, this is what I copy and pasted, but let's talk about this for a second. So what I want to do is I want to be able to pass my data of all of the genre objects to the HTML that I have to display, okay? Now, the way we do this, I don't know if you all remember, you have to remember to import your models so that you can access the database at all. So I've set that to a variable genres. And if you want, you can print this to help you understand what's happening. I can show you that in the terminal later. And then we're setting that to a variable and passing that entire package through this variable here, this data. Now, right now I don't have a list genres HTML, and that's why it's getting angry at me. So why don't we add that? So let's see, let me just put it in list genres. So genres.html. This is within the folder, and let's see. Okay, so in our list genres, all we have to do is extend what I've put in the index, and I'm putting this block content in there. It basically just has the header, which says genres, and then loops through the data that I've sent over, genres, and it creates in this for loop a link to each one. Okay, now there's some important things to note about this. First of all, this extends because I've put everything, my boilerplate, in the index.html, and I've put this little block segment here. Everything here is extended, and that's pretty important because eventually when we have other templates that also require JavaScript or Axios, it will all be connected already. So I don't need to worry about attaching that to everything. Now here, we're just looping through, we're adding these links in, and we're putting in genre.name to get the name of the genre, and we're listing that out. Now, one really important part too is a common error that I see in this type of setting is when you go to views.py and you're passing data through, data is not a value that can be accessed on your HTML. Like that is not a name or a variable name. It's really just saying that I'm passing data through. What you can actually access is what's listed in this object, okay? So don't try to do like data.name or something like that because the HTML does not know what that is. So that's just something I see often. So if you get an error like that, maybe that could be a possible reason. Okay, now another thing to note about this href here in list genres, this is talking about list books, but right now I don't have a list books, right? Because I haven't set that up. So maybe when you're testing this out, let's actually do this. We can just put, we can just put h1, and maybe you just print out the genre name. Okay, so this can act as like a sort of checkpoint for you. What is happening here? I'm just printing out the genre name. Okay, so let's run that. Okay, hold on. Actually, I'm just going to cut this out first. Okay. And let me share my screen. Why is that? Can you see my Chrome right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
You go to genres and it lists off my genres. Now I accidentally put it high in the index just to prove that that was working, but we can remove that. So I'm just going to remove that from the index.html. But yeah, so it says genres, it's listing everything here. So that proves that we have that linkage working. And now we need to set up how we're going to do the books now. So the reason why I cut that link out first is because sometimes for some reason the commenting gets a little wonky and it starts trying to like debug that. But I'm just going to put that back now.
We're still seeing your Chrome.
Okay. Oh wait, can I just share this? Can you see my VS Code now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. So now we can have this href, and it will get mad at me because I haven't defined list books yet, but I'm going to do that. So let me go back to urls.py, and let's say this is our next point now in the GitHub thing that I sent out. So we go to our book app, and this is, hold on. Okay, so now we have the next URL that we've set up, or the project is asking us to set up. So again, this is a little bit different because now we don't have genres in the beginning, but we're going to do this. This sets up the genre ID URL with the book ID URL to kind of link us to just the book. Oops, wait, this is the book info. We want list books. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So now we just want the genre ID to be listing all the books that belong to that genre itself. So I've already done this, but you can think about this as, okay, I have a definition here that will be in the views.py, and I've named this list books just for simplicity's sake. So now we have one URL that's going to take us, this link is going to take us to a list of books that belong to this genre ID, okay? That means we go to views.py, and we want to create that list books method, right? So in this, okay, for this part now, we just want to list all our books. So this is pretty simple. It's just rendering these books after we've gone through the database. Okay, so let's talk about this code now. This is taking a variable. We're setting each object filtered by genre ID equals genre ID, which is passed through from the URL. Now let's go back to the list genres thing to see what I mean by that. So when I call list books, okay, it requires a genre ID from me because I've listed that in the urls.py. Do you see that, this genre ID? So in order to pass that through in the URL, I need to make sure that I've put this after I've stated the URL name, okay? So the URL name here is list books. Genre ID is the variable I'm passing through. And I can pass multiple, however many variables I want by just, putting another ID or a number, or I could even put like 3 or something like that. But basically is passing through a variable, whatever this variable may be in that moment for that link, into this genre ID in the URL, okay? So it's saying, I want to call list books with the genre ID put in here, okay? Now, this translates into the views.py because we have a genre ID variable. Now, this won't work if you leave this out because this list books is actually expecting a variable here. So if you don't put that there, it's going to cause an error. So make sure that if you have something like this, where you're expecting a variable in your urls.py, that you're accounting for it within your views.py in the parameters, okay? So I'm just going to reinstate this. Okay, so that's where I got the genre ID. Does anybody have questions about that before I continue? No questions?
I just want to point out in your URLs, when you repasted the correct link, you forgot to re-add genres to the front of it.
All right, thank you. Okay, so now that we have that entire thing with the correct URL this time, let's look at our use.py. Okay, so now we're doing the same thing. We're taking we're taking a variable. we're taking all the book objects that we have, filtering it by the genre ID that was passed in through the URL and matching it to the genre ID that exists within our models.py. Then we have genre name. That's going to be another variable that holds the name of the genre. And I just wanted that because I wanted to print it in the HTML. And then we want to render the list books HTML so that we can see all of the books. And we want to eventually link this to all of our other like book info for each specific book. So think about it as like a link of those, and then we want that to be displayed as a list of all the names. So in listbooks.html, this is going to look really similar to what we did with the other list genres. So let's look at that. We have list genres here, and I'm going to add listbooks.html. Oops. Okay, and this is another error that might occur, but if you see that you've created the file that's outside of folder, just make sure to put it back into the book app folder. Otherwise, you basically have a folder of your app where you're actually storing the templates you want, and then you've accidentally put that file outside of there. So just make sure these are flush. That's just an error that I see sometimes too. Okay, so we've done the same thing. We've extended to the index.html, right? I've passed in genre as the genre name, so that's pretty nice. I just pass that through so I can get the name. And then same thing as what we did with the previous HTML with listing genres, except now we're just listing books. So we have this for loop, we have this href. I'm going to remove these for now because this is for when I want to add a book. So I'll remember to come back to that. Let's see. This, instead of putting an href here, just to test this out, I'm going to uncomment this. Do that. Okay, so now we should be getting a list of the titles of the books. And let's just double check that. Okay, so now I'm going to run my server. Let's see if I can. Okay, so now here we have our link. I left the heading there, but we can take that away later. And now when we click on mystery, you see how this one is here in the URL now? It's taking us to this first genre, which is in our case mystery, and it's listing off each value in that belongs to that genre. Okay. So, and then it should work for all of the other books, right? Don Quixote, yeah, and then fantasy. Cool. Okay. Let's go back to the page. Does anybody have any questions about that part? It's kind of similar to the list genres. Nothing?
Yeah,
Okay.
can we just look at the view again where we're passing in the data?
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I see
So
what's going on.
Yeah, so we're getting all the books based on the genre that we're in, that we clicked on. The genre name is going to just be whatever the genre ID is, right? Because there's only one primary key for each. We pass data through, we get books and genre. And actually, I did want to fix something. So in list books, we had genre here. I forgot to write genre dot name. But that should take care of the naming thing. Let's see, please. Yeah, because when we get this, remember that this is not like the name of the genre really. This is actually the entire genre object. So when we reference it in the HTML, we need to make sure that we're referencing a specific attribute of the genre or a specific attribute of the book. So when we think about looping through like book in books, remember that books is a list of objects that are from like rows of the database. And when we say when we say book itself, that is one of those objects. It's not necessarily the name of the title. So referencing each value within it is really important. Okay, now let me clean some stuff up. So first of all, I don't really need the heading thing anymore. Where did I put it? Genres. I don't need the genre name anymore. Cool. And now when I list books, instead of just the book title, I want to be able to click on a book and be able to see its title, author, and description. So the way we go about this, same kind of idea where we have the, sorry, I just left it. We have the link that takes us to a specific URL in our urls.py. So let's set that up. So in our urls.py, let's see where we go. I'm gonna remember to put the genres first. So we got genres slash, I think I'm gonna call it, let's see, what do I call it here? And this is the same thing as like looking at the URLs listed in the README. But essentially we're gonna take that, we're gonna go to this, the same thing that's listed. So genre, let's see, I'm gonna do genre ID slash books, and then book ID, right? Okay. I'm just gonna copy the rest of this so that we have a basis. Okay. Okay, so now that we've set up this URL, it's the same idea. We go back to this definition within views.py, right? And we need to define what books info is now. So what do we need in book info? What do we need in book info? Well, we want to be able to display all the information from a book, right? So what information do we have from the URL? That's the first thing that we need to think about. The first thing we have in the URL, we should be able to be given the genre ID and book ID. Okay, so these are the two important pieces that connect everything. We got the genre ID in here, we've got the book ID in here. And then that means that whenever we call this URL, we need to pass these two variables in. So where are we calling this URL? We're calling it from this book here. Now we need to set up the href. So let's just take this link. And we're going to call this from book title. We're giving it the link to the book title. And then we're going to call this ID. So let's see, where did it go? We're calling it book info. So that's what our URL is called. We need the genre ID, the book ID. So luckily, we can just do book info. We already have the genre ID because remember we passed our genre object here. And then we need our book ID for each book that's being passed through. Luckily, we're passing each book at a time, each book object. So we can just grab that as it's passing through this loop. Okay, so now we have this URL, book info, and we're populating the URL with genre ID first for the genre ID aspect of the URL, and then the book ID of this part. So now it should have those two pieces of information, and it's being clicked by this link that's the book title name. Okay, so at this point we should have the link to the URL. Now we go to urls.py and we need to take a look at book info now. So like the views.py of this. Like that. Let's just take So we want to be able to get basically one object. And this is what's really interesting about this one specifically, is we actually don't need the genre ID, but this is similar to cars and brands where like, I don't need the brand ID to know the car ID and get that from the database. But if that's passed through in the URL, you do have to account for that. So in our case, when we're putting in our book info, all we have to do is get the data for a specific ID because all of the IDs are unique or different. So here we have book info. Now book info takes our book ID, finds that ID with this book objects all.get within the database, brings back one book object, sets that book equal to a variable within our data, and we pass it through. So now our HTML and book info should have one variable book that is the book that ID that we passed through when we linked it to the book title, right? And now we can access any data from that. So in other words, we can just set up our HTML to just display that information in a list. So I'm just going to pull from this. In this case, we have, oops. Let's book add, and I think it's a book info.html as matching from here, right? And go for that. Okay, so remember this is the same concept. I'm extending from index.html so I can have that boilerplate there, and I've blocked my content. This is now we have the book title, which I've just put as at the top with the heading, and then I have the author. I've done book.author to get that value from book, and description book.description, that should take care of that. And right now I have this edit book thing here, but we don't need to worry about that yet because that has to do with Axios post request. Cool. Okay, so let's check this out now. We've set up this book info. So now to reiterate the path that we just took, right? We're starting at list books, which is when we listed all the titles. Each one of these are now a link, so an href. We're referencing a name URL, and we're passing in genre ID and book ID to those two variable spaces in the URL. And what I mean by that is when we look at our urls.py and we look at book info, which is the name we pass through, we are required to pass through a genre ID and a book ID. And what I've done now is I've just passed that number for each one, okay? So now these two values are being passed through in the URL. I'm calling book info from the views.py. It goes to views.py. Then in book info, I'm taking the genre ID in the URL, book ID in the URL, and those guys are going to be helping me kind of query that data from the database and setting it equal to one of these variables, book. In the data, I'm assigning one of these, I'm assigning this object to this value, and then I'm passing it through into data, rendering book info.html, and that is here. And then I'm taking that one book object that I've drawn from the database, and I'm going through and I'm displaying the information in an H1B, tag. Okay, so with that in mind, let's see what that does. Let's see. Okay. Here we go. So share screen. Okay. So we have mystery, classics, fantasy now. We're going to mystery, going to Sherlock Holmes. Once we click it, this is the moment where we get the title and the author and the description displayed. Does everything so far make sense to people? Or is that confusing? Like, I want you to take an extra look at this URL. This is what we were passing through for genre ID and book ID. And that's how we were able to get Sherlock Holmes from the database. Okay? No questions so far? Okay. Now, let's go back and great. Now, let me share my, okay, let me go back. Okay, here. Whew, okay. Okay, so that's the first part without Axios. We haven't touched JavaScript yet. That's kind of just like a big overview of how we're linking everything together. Now let's get into Axios and how we're going to add stuff and like remove stuff from the database. Now this, I'm going to create a link first so that I can get to.
Avery,
Yeah.
sorry to jump in. I just wanted to check if we wanted to do maybe like a 5-minute break or not.
Do people want a 5-minute break? I can do either. I can do
Totally
either.
your call and the class's call. I just wanted to check it with folks.
I mean, I can do either way. I'm fine.
A couple folks are mentioning break. I think that would be
Okay,
good.
let's
And that
do a
way people can get water, run to the bathroom, all that good stuff.
Okay. So 5 minutes, and then we'll be back at around 3 or yeah, 3. Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to say this is awesome. I've had to pop in and out a little, but been really enjoying it. Logan and Avery. So thank you.
Okay, welcome back from the break. Let's just continue on. So basically I have 2 more parts that I want to cover before we end this demo. One is adding books to a genre, and the other one is editing a book that already exists. So first of all, we need to kind of create an entry point, right? Where are we going to start adding a book? And what I've decided for this is I want to add a book once I've clicked into a genre, okay? So where is that? That's in my list books, right? Because once I'm in list books, I already know what genre I'm in, and it's already listing those books out. So I took this away, but this is in the notes. So I'm just going to create a URL here that is going to, oops, wait, I should share the screen. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is the list books where I was listing all the books out and allowing them to be linked to the book specific book info. So I'm just going to put an href here, a link that's going to link me to a URL that I'm going to name add book. And the reason why I've already put genre ID here is because if you look at the path that I need to have in the README, it will have the URL. So actually, I should probably set that up first. Let me show you what that path would look like. So for the path of the path of the add book, I'm going to put this down. So I'm just going to call it this. And I'm adding genres. And just to repeat one last time, if people forgot, the reason I have so many of these already written out is because in the README instructions, it says like what the URL should do. So I'm just copying what the instructions say. So I've put genres in there. Let's see. I've associated it with a definition in the views.py, and I've named it add book. Okay, so let's go back to my original URL call. So in my list books, I've put an a link that is calling my add books URL. And if you'll notice again, it requires me to have a genre ID. When I'm in list books, I already have passed through my genre, right? I have a genre object ready for me. So all I have to do is say, I just want the ID of whatever genre I'm in. So now we're repopulating this genre ID. It's going to have the genre, the number that's the genre ID there. And then it's going to call add book, which requires this genre ID in its parameter. Okay. Now we haven't written anything for this yet. So let's go to the views.py and we'll start on this add genre. So let's go here. Okay. So here's the first thing I want to show you. I want you to ignore this post request for now, because the way I want you to think about this is the first time I click this URL, the first automatic type of request it is a GET request. So I want to first take care of what the person sees right away when I click the URL. Now, the first thing they're going to see is I want to render my HTML that will have form data, or at least inputs, so that I can add their information into the form, right? So I'm going to go to templates, and I want to create that form first, or create that input section first. So let's see. Okay. So add book.html. Okay. So this is the first thing that I want to show up when I get a GET request from this URL. So I'm doing the same thing where I really want to make sure that I have index.html extended here. This is especially important on this one too, because this is when I'm connecting my JavaScript, right? So this is really an important piece. So block content, I've blocked this content off where I'm going to be putting it. So I have my input set up, right? So let's just go through this really slowly. We got my heading, add new book. I have a label that's going to go next to my input just to tell you what each input is supposed to be. I've given each input a specific ID that I can reference later in my JavaScript, and that lists out the title, the author, the description. Now, as I commented here, why don't I have an input for genre? Well, it's because when I click on the URL, the genre is already given. So if you wanted to write if you wanted to add a book to a different genre, you should go to that genre section and add that book. That is essentially how I've constructed this, okay? So if I'm already in a genre, I already know the genre ID, so I don't really need to worry about that. And so I just need the title, author, the description, and then I have my button here that's on click, and this is when the post request comes in, right? So I have saved book as my method that is going to be defined in my JavaScript. Okay, so let's look at that JavaScript. Okay, so right now I have nothing. But first of all, I do want to mention that it's nice to console log some sort of message there so that you know that your JavaScript is connected. That's just a good thing to try out. Now let me go to my JavaScript really quick. So the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we are getting each element by ID and getting their value. And here, okay, so this is the first half of it. Let's talk about this first. So at this moment, I'm defining my function, and first, I'm going to assign each value that I get from the input to a variable in my function here. Okay, so just to reiterate, let me just clear this up. So in my add book, we have this ID, new title, new author, new description. I'm calling get element by ID to kind of solidify those by themselves. And then when I type dot value, this is really important. I see a lot of people forget this. If you forget your dot value, you're just having an object there. You're not actually getting the string value that you have within that object. So just remember to type dot value to get each individual input value that the user has already typed in, okay? Now, the second half of this is where we get to the meat of it, the Axios post request that we all know and love. So this is the general context of it. This is what it looks like. Okay, there are a few things I really want to focus on when we look at the Axios post request. A lot of you already know that this is URL, right? But what does that mean? Like, what URL? This URL block for this first thing when you enter post, this is relative to the URL that you are currently on, okay? So if I had a URL that said, you know, genre, if I said genre /book/card, I don't know. This, let's say when I click the button, the URL was this to begin with. If I leave this empty, it will rerun this URL as a post request, okay? Now, it's tricky because if I put, I don't know, brands like that, the URL that's in here is actually added to the current URL I'm on. So it'll turn into this, okay? Oops. So it's all relative. You're adding on to the current URL you have. Now, a special version of this is, let's say it was this when I clicked the button, where the URL was this when I clicked the button, and I had this as just a /. It would actually turn into just the server number. So it would just be this. It would just be this. That's if I just put only a / there, okay? So keep in mind, this is not just like any random value, and you don't like, usually most of the errors come from this. You want to know what URL you are running and what request you're running it to. So the reason why I made this blank is because I want to rerun post. I want to rerun my URL here, this one, the add book, except I'm going to modify the views.py so that it will take a post request too. Does that make sense? So I'm not going through and running a different URL. By leaving this space blank, I'm just asking Axios to reload the page, the URL that I'm on, with the same exact URL, except now it's a post request. Okay, so that's the reason for that. Now, Dan?
Yeah, does Axios actually reload the page?
Yes.
Or does, okay.
I think, yeah, it should. But it basically just says, you know, I'm going to rerun the urls.py, the urls.py here. I noticed I missed a comma. Yeah, it's going to rerun this guy, except now it's a post request. So let me go to my views.py and take care of that for a second. So I'm going to uncomment this now, because now it is possible to have a post request, right? Because I've written the Axios. Oops. What happened here? I guess that was a comment. Okay. Cool. And this is another case where I don't have JSON defined. I just import JSON, which takes care of it for me. Okay. Now, let's go back to the JavaScript. And I know we've talked about Axios a lot, but I just want to drill it into your minds what's happening. Okay. We've rerun this URL as a post request. This second thing, so this is separated by a comma, note that. This is what's passed into the request.body, okay? This information. What am I passing through? I'm associating this value, this key value, with this variable that I've gotten, this value that I've gotten from the user. I'm associating each one, and I'm putting it all into this dictionary or object. And I'm passing it into request.body. So think about it as you've packaged all this information, right? And where are you sending this information to? You're sending it to this URL again, right? But as a post request. So let's follow the path. You're saying rerun this, okay? What does this tell you to go to? It goes to views.addBook. You go to views, right? Is this a post request or is it a get request now? It's a post request, okay? So you go to if request.method equals post, we're running this. Now, the thing that we've encapsulated, right? All of that data about like the user input, that is in request.body. We want it to be a JSON object. So we say JSON loads, and then we put request.body in there to kind of retrieve the information we've packaged and thrown to this side. So from JavaScript to Python, okay? Now body is a JSON object, so we still need to reference the key value that we want. But now this is where we are making book object, So in order to make a new row, right, we need to reference this book, which remember, you have to import from models, right? So that it knows what you're talking about. Book. Now specify which field you want. So this is from our models.py, if you'll remember. This is what I'm referencing when I'm saying title equals whatever, author equals whatever, description. That's the model field. We set it equal to the information we've packaged in the request.body, and we are getting it from the key value, right? So this title, now this title author description, this is from the JavaScript here, where we say title author description. Does that make sense? Okay, let me go back to the views. Okay, and one last thing we need to remember. We need to add our own genre ID here. Why? Because I didn't ask for the user to give me that information. I was passed that information within the URL. Okay, so if you think back to when we were doing list books and I had this genre ID here, this is when it comes into play. I've passed this genre ID through the URLs into here, right? When it ran again with the post request, it still had the same genre ID, right? And that genre ID is now making its way to the views.py. In the it goes into the parameters, and now I'm setting it equal to the genre ID here. Okay, does everyone see that path? Now, finally, remember to save that to the database. So it's just .save. And that ends your post request. Okay, now a small thing here. I've seen people like put this in quotations. That will also cause you an error. So if you run across some syntax where you're like, wait a second, why is this not working? Maybe it's that. So just be aware of this one. I think that's pretty confusing. Okay, but it's not completely over yet because we finished the post request on the Python side. Now, main.js is expecting something to happen afterwards. So once you finish the post request, I have to redirect, I want to redirect people to back to the list of books. Okay, now I want to explain this too. Why can't we redirect from the Python? Like, why can't we redirect from here? Because in order to redirect, I would have to return something or like ask for that render to happen, but that would return to here. So it would think of that as a response, and then you can't redirect that way. So in order to redirect from the page you're on, you have to do it through JavaScript in this case, because post request is expecting something back. So it'll jump back here and you won't be able to render from JavaScript. So now here's what I was referencing before with this window.location.href. Okay, so what is happening here? This is actually a way to control the URL again by reference. So actually, let's literally take what we're on. Let's take this URL. Oops. Okay, so this works out because, okay, this is the URL we ran the post request, remember? When I do // it removes the last end of the URL from the URL that I'm currently on. So in this case, I take away new, and because I have a second one, I take away books. Okay, so that's effectively what this is doing. Then it runs the URL I have here. And what does this URL do? Voila, if you go to your urls.py, it matches this guy, right? And when you run that URL, it does the same thing again. It lists books, and then it runs your list books here, runs your HTML, and it should bring you back to that page. That's how the redirect works there. Okay, does this make sense to people? If I wanted to reload this page, I could just make this space, but then it would just rerun the page as a GET request. Okay, so then it would just show me my form again, which is also fine. Maybe that's what you want. But in my case, I wanted it to reload the list of books. Okay, so that's what that's doing there. So let's run that and double check, make sure I have everything down. Oh, Okay, this should throw an error because I want to show you this thing. Okay. Sure. Okay. So let's say I've already gone. Oops. Wait. Where's my? Oh, there we go. There's my href for my add new book. Okay. So remember how we added this? Michael, you have a question?
Yeah. So just a quick one on your views. How come you don't have to return anything to your Axios? Because like when I was trying to do the assessment 3, whenever I would send stuff to the back end, it like wouldn't let me do anything unless I sent something back from Python to Django or from Django to my JavaScript. So like how does the add book where like once you do new book.save, that's like the end of that if statement. Why
Yeah.
aren't you returning anything to the Axios?
I think it's because I don't know if you use your response variable later. Like, did you print that or something afterwards?
I don't remember off the top of my head how I handled it, but I just remember it was something that stumped me for a little bit on the assessment.
So, okay, I actually do want to show you that just in case people do run into the same error. If you, okay, so I don't do it here mainly because I don't need to. Like in my JS, you see how response is not highlighted? It's because I'm not using response anywhere here. Okay, so my guess is that maybe you console logged a response or something and it was expecting to use response and it wasn't returning anything. That could be one thing. If that comes up and you don't care what your JSON is, you can just do this. I think it's called JSON response, and then just put an empty thing there. And then I think you have to you have to import JSON response. This will eliminate your error. It'll just return something empty. And because I don't really care what the JSON response is here, because I'm not using anything in the response, right? I don't really care. But that's what I do to keep it empty. Otherwise, you know, if I wanted to do, if I wanted to send, you know, success, right? I don't know. I could send that back and then my JavaScript would have information for me that I could use. So then I could, you know, maybe if I console log response, I just wanted to say success, or I want to get element by ID and change that. That's a way to get around that. But if you're not using the response and you're getting that error where it's saying like, hey, why aren't you sending anything back? Go ahead and you can just use this JSON response and then honestly just leave this empty with curly braces and it will just return nothing. And you're not using that information anyway, so it should just treat it okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Dan, what's your question?
Yeah, so you don't need to return any kind of response, like any type of HTTP response, HTTP redirect, render, or even JSON response. Like you can just your request or your post request method can just end with new book.save, and then so like right now you're not sending anything back to the front end from that.
Right here, right? Is that what you're talking about? Like,
if you could go back to your views. So are you saying you don't need line 32?
Yeah, like, I'm pretty sure you don't. At least I was able to run it without, but I'm just saying that if it does give you an error and you're not going to use the response in any way, just shove this in there and it'll wipe the error and you'll be fine. Okay. Now let's.
Sorry. Okay. I just have one more, just to add to that question that he had. If you do get rid of line 32, does line 34 run after it's done with the if? After it's done saving?
That's a good question. I don't think it should.
Okay, so the save must have some kind of return, like an implicit return or something.
I kind of think it's the request dot equals post, but that's a good point. I think maybe just like if you're not going to use the response, just put this down there just for safety in case. I'm pretty sure my code, when I tested it, it didn't need this. But just leave it there so that you can return it and then force it not to run this. So let's just leave it for now, and it should work the same way.
Yeah. I think execution continues to line 34 if we don't have the return on line 32. I think.
I'm confused by that because I ran it without that, and it worked fine. So I don't really know. I don't really have a concrete answer for why that is.
I also could totally be missing something. I'm jumping in and out a little. There could also be a default Django behavior that's happening or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not really aware of that, but okay. So for now, to prevent it, let's put this here. Logan, you want to say something?
Yeah, does the Axios.then, doesn't that, like, even if it renders the add book, doesn't it just go to the list books or whatever?
Yeah, but that's what I was curious about, was like with Luis's question, like, why doesn't it run the whole thing and then return this to the then, you know?
Oh.
So I don't know. I feel like this is another moment of like Django being smarter than I am and like taking care of that for me. But you're right. I think just to be careful, like, let's put this return here just so we know that something is returning and we're forcing it to do something else.
Totally. Yeah. And it's always good to be explicit when we can. So I'm with you.
Okay. Now let me share this screen again. So again, I just want to emphasize the place that I've put this link is once you've already clicked on a genre. The genre ID is already stored here. So we actually already know what it is. That's why when we do add book, we don't need to put an input for the genre ID because the genre ID we actually already know. Okay, now hopefully this throws the right error. Okay, submit. Now, this is an error that I think a lot of people see. But this I think is pretty obvious what to do if you didn't catch it already. This is a 403 Csrf token error, right? Because this is a form and we didn't do Csrf exempt. So right here, you're seeing forbidden Csrf token missing. If you get this error, then you know now we need to make it exempt. So I'm just going to copy over the code to import the Csrf exempt. Okay, and then we're going to put it here, the decorator. Okay, now I also want to point this out as just a general comment. You always want to look at this terminal to help you out because it does tell you when you're using a post request, in which URL, get request for this URL. Like, this is super important information that can help you a lot if you're suffering with Axios stuff. So this is a good way to go about that. And also, this is also pretty important too, this like 403. When I see this 403, generally, I think it's a Csrf exempt, and those can be pretty indicative of other things too. So just watch out for that. Oh, I forgot to mention this when we were doing the JavaScript stuff, but if you get a 404 error, generally, I would guess it's a URL error. Okay, so if you see that, it means that there's generally something wrong with like your request in Axios, not necessarily your Python. So if you see 404, check that out first. If you see a 500, that's an internal error. So that means if you get a 500 here, just look at what message error pops up here or redo your views.py. So try to like minimize the area in which you're trying to fix your error is what I mean. Okay. What was I doing? Okay, now let's run this code again. So run that, add new book. Okay, something happened. Let's see. fucking missing? Why is it still missing? Okay, give me a second.
You need to restart the server, maybe.
Maybe. I think so. Okay, let's try that. That's fine. Okay. Let me share it again. Okay, it's redirected us, and now we're back at our list books, right? Now we have this one I just added, and when we click on it, it's taken care of just like every other book because it's been added to our database. Okay, so I know this is a pain, but one last time, I'm going to go through the entire path that we took just to like link everything together. Okay, so the first thing we did, we added this URL here that's going to take us to our add book form. Okay, this once clicked takes us to the URL that's listed here and passes through the genre ID. So it goes to this add book, passes in the genre ID, then goes to this add book within views. The views goes down here. It has the genre ID already. It skips the post because the first time we click the URL, the default pattern is a GET request. So it return renders this instead, okay? So it goes to the HTML. It goes to add book. We have a bunch of inputs here. The second we click the button, it goes to save book, which is in the JavaScript, right? The JavaScript takes all of those inputs, mashes it into request.body here, reruns the same URL, right? That's why we did space, as a post request now. So that means you go back to your URL, you run this path again because it's the same path, except now it's a post request. We take the same format again. We go to add book in the views. The views takes this add book that still has this genre ID there, except now it's a post request. We've gathered the information from the body. We've used that information to create a new row in our database. We save that to the database. We return this empty JSON object back to main.js. Then it runs this then part, which redirects us to back from our URL, which just happens to be list books. And then it reruns this. Oh, I should say it goes to the URLs that is list books. Then it goes to the views.py, which recalculates all this object all filter, objects all get ID, packages all that data all over again with my new data inside. And when we go back to listbooks.html, it lists it alongside it. And that's how it updates. Okay? Does everyone feel okay about that? Okay, this is going to be this is the final stretch where we have our edit now. So edit is super similar to add because, it's just the same kind of idea with the input form. We want to take, hold on. So I'm actually going to start with where we want to edit the book. So let's say in order to edit a book, you want to select the book first. And we're already doing that when we're doing book info, right? So in order to do this, let's hold on, give me a second. So we want to add a URL here, a href, and actually, let's set up this first. So let's set up this URL. And again, this is from the README where it's saying specifically what you want in the URL. We're going to make it here, and I'm going to add genres in the beginning. Cool. Okay, so now I have a path that I want to be referring to edit a book. Okay, now this has the genres, blah, blah, blah. We have the genre ID, the books. This is just the URL path we want to edit. Now, when I reference this, I want to reference it in books info because that's where I already know what the book ID is and what the genre ID is. And then I can like specify, click into this book, and then you can edit it. Okay. So then let's say equals, and then we want the, we call this edit book. So a lot of the same idea here. No. Oh, goodness. Okay. And again, we let's see. Oh, okay. We have book ID, but that happens second. The first one we need to take care of actually is genre ID. Now, this is actually something you can retroactively do too. I'm going to come back to this. But in views.py, when we're passing in data to this book info HTML, we have book here, right? But honestly, like we can also pass in genre ID if we wanted to. So let's put genre ID, genre. Actually, yeah, let's just put genre ID. And genre ID. Okay, so now we're passing this value into our book info that's being passed to our book info HTML. Okay, so now we can access that, and I'm just going to stuff that right here. And that should be fine, because remember, book is an entire object, so I need to reference it by ID, but because I pass genre ID through just as its own variable, I can just put genre ID, and that should be fine. What is this? Oh, remember, this is another thing I should remember always, putting this in quotations. Okay, so that should link up, and we're just going to say edit book. Okay, so now we have a bunch of these things where we have one link that says edit book, and we're passing in the ID, so we let edit book know which ID of book we want and which genre it belongs to. Okay, now this link to the urls.py we had here, so we have edit book, genre edit blah blah. This has the genre ID that I passed through and the book ID that I passed through, and it's going to the views.py, which will have our edit book. Okay, now in this views, we are going to do our edit book, which I'm just going to, it's really similar to what we had in our ad book, except a few things. I'm just going to add the decorator this time because I think we all know that's important. And actually, I'm going to return this JSON response again, just in case. Cool. And now let's walk through this again. We need our, oh, I forgot. We need our JSON request, I think. Yes. Okay. So first of all, we want just, we're going to ignore this post. And we're going to say our get, right? Because the first time I click that URL, it's going to be a get request. So it runs this. I want it to get its data first. And I want, the reason why I want this right here is because I want to pass in the information to populate the input fields first. So let's say my user doesn't know like all the information about Sherlock Holmes, but they still want to edit it. Well, I can populate the input field so that they know what's already there. Okay, but in order to do that, I need to get the Sherlock Holmes book first. Okay, so let's make that HTML document. So edit book.html. Okay, now I'm just gonna paste this in, but let's talk about it too. This looks a lot like, actually, I'm pretty sure all of it is basically like the ad book one, except, yeah, okay. So the only difference between this and ad book is that we can preset the value to whatever I already had before. So this will allow me to say, you know, you are editing the Sherlock Holmes book. Let me put Sherlock Holmes in the title as the input for you first, and then you can edit that however you want. Like maybe you just want to add a letter to what I already have. By setting value equals to whatever here, it will populate the form for you. So that's just another thing that you want to try to do, especially if it asks for that on the test. This is a thing that like threw me off, but I hope you all remember. When you add this variable in, put quotations around it so that the input can stomach that as something you can set a value to. So that's pretty important. It could be, you know, potentially detrimental to your program. Okay, same thing. On click, we got edit book. Edit book is going to be in the JavaScript. Okay, it's going to be in my JavaScript. So let's go back. Edit main JS. I'm going to add my JavaScript in here. And we're just going to copy this code too. Okay, we got edit book. Okay, same idea, right? We're getting element by ID. We're getting the value. That's super important. We're doing an Axios propose request. We're going to recycle this URL. So we're just running it again. We're packaging everything. This should look super, I mean, it's the same thing to the save. And then we want to, I'm changing the URL to something else now because as you'll remember, let me go back to my urls.py. Here, this is actually longer, right, than this was. So in order for me to return to just genres.id to match this guy, I'm going to have to do it 3 times instead of 2 to redirect it. Does that make sense? So I'm basically backtracking 3 times in this case, just because my URL is longer. Okay, so we've done the post request. We're sending all of that packaged information over. We go to views.py. Let's see. Okay, and then we uncomment this, which is what we talked about with the post request. This is almost the same thing and really the same logic as the add book, except first of all, we get our object body again with the new values. We get the book that we want from the database. Now, we just, instead of making a new object, right? This is making a totally new row. This is now just changing the specific values in models.py, right here. We're just changing these specific variables and changing it to whatever we got in the body, okay? When we change each of these things, that's editing the information. We still need to save it because that's just how PSQL remembers your information. So once we've saved it, and we'll just return this JSON response just to make sure it doesn't keep running until here, it returns to our, where did it go? It returns to our JS and it reroutes us back to the list of books. Okay, any questions about that? Nothing so far? Okay, we'll run that. Okay, let's hope that works. I'm gonna share my screen here. Share, I think I should take care of it. Okay, so let's say we did want to edit Sherlock Holmes. We got this edit book here now. Okay, notice this is why we needed the value equals and then our variable in there, because I wanted it to just know what the book was talking about. So I have all these populated. Let's put 2 here. Let's hope this works. Aha, it brings me back to my list of books, right? And because it recalculated all the books within my database, this is now edited. Okay, and now I can edit the book back. And it should submit. And it brings me back to this mystery genre. And that is it. Okay. Now I know I did this once, but I think it's super important to just do this one last time. We're gonna speed run through the edit order. So remember here, we have list, let's see, we have book info. Once I clicked into the Sherlock Holmes, give me all of his info kind of deal. We take this URL, we click on this URL that sends us to edit book, with the genre information and the book ID information. That takes us to the URL down here that is edit book. Edit book takes us to the views.py edit book, where I run it because it's the first time and I ran the URL. It's a GET request, skips all of this, goes to data so I can pass in the book that I got using the book ID. So remember, book objects.all get ID. That's one book. That's the Sherlock Holmes book. I pass that in based on a key value, which is book here, passing it to editbooks.html. I run to HTML of edit books. This gets passed through and it has the ID of each one and has the input for each category. Because I put value equals book title, which is what I passed through, remember, in the data, it's populating that information within that input bar before I've even done anything. So it loads it with that information in there. On the on click, it's asking for my JavaScript, which remember was linked through the index.html, but because I've extended it, it belongs to this guy too. So then it knows, okay, I'm going to go to my my JavaScript, goes through, does edit book, takes whatever value I've put in, post it as the same URL. So now it's a post request, but the same URL. I've packaged all my data in there. Okay, because it's the same URL, it calls the same URL again. Oops. It runs this again, goes to my views.edit book, except this time it's a post request, goes here, unloads the information I've sent over, gets the book that I wanted to edit, which is the book ID, changes the value for that book object that I've just gotten, and then I save that information back to the database. I return this JSON object, which goes back to my main.js. Then it runs its then thing over here. Window.location.href is going to redirect me. Oops. And because my URL was super long, right, we have an extra, we want to redirect it to just genres int genre ID here. We just want this to run, right? Just a list book. So we need to remove 1, 2, 3 of these URL like segments. So in JavaScript, we go back 1, 2, 3. That will take us to this URL, right? It calls on list books in the views.py. List books then calls all of the objects, filters it by genre, blah, 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 passes that information to list books. And with my information already edited, right, because now it's filtering based on a new database, our newly updated database, and it shows us list books, which will have our new book in there because it's a for loop. Whew. Okay. Any questions about anything at all that I talked about today? I know that was like super, like all over the place and like a lot of jumping around through. So if any of it confused you, I'm sorry, but also just message me on Slack and I will walk you through any part of it. I want you to all take a good look at all the portions we talked about today, and I feel like you'll be set. Hopefully that didn't like confuse more people, but there you go. Okay, any like residual questions or things that popped up?
That was awesome, Avery. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to concur, Avery and Logan. That was really wonderful. Thank you. And you had a captive audience, rather a rapt audience. Opposite of captive.
I
Okay,
had a
well,
question.
yeah.
Do you think, because I'm not sure if our assessment is going to be requiring us to do auth, but I feel like it is. Would you also be able to show us how to like add like an auth feature to it. So let's say, like you log in and this is like what your library looks like. And then like if Logan was to log into it, he would have a different set of books and genres. Like, is that something you think you can help show us too, or no?
I think I could do that. It might require some more preparation though, because I would have to redo like the migrations and stuff because the order of that is different. If you wanted that, I might be able to put something together for Thursday, or Adam, if you wanted on Friday, if we do the review and you just wanted to add to the project, you can just fork from my GitHub and do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I think both of those are good options, and that we should figure that out like tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worthy of either another breakout session or, like you said, building on top of the code that you already wrote.
But yeah, we can look into that. I'm not sure if the auth is actually on the next assessment. I don't know if you can speak to that, Adam.
I'm not
But-
sure if it's on there either. Yeah, I don't want to speak to it, but I'm not. I think, yeah, Michael, let me actually check in with Raphael and get back to you on that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Speaking of the like sign-in stuff, I was looking at some of the errors for the make migration, and especially that one with the, I don't know, it has like lazy in it. It's like the auth motto user or whatever. I feel like that error comes from trying to sign in and stuff. But like everything that Avery showed, I don't think that error usually appears.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody has anything else to add or like questions or. But yeah, I think then you guys can all go tackle React now after a Django lecture, but yeah, okay. Should
Yeah.
I just leave this breakout room or?
No, Logan and Avery, thank you both so much. And let me stop the recording.